Hello everybody, this is a lecture of history and archaeology, and today we are going to cover the topic Ancient Monuments Preservation Act. In this particular topic we will have to deal with two major acts which were passed by the government of India which relate to the preservation and conservation of monuments and antiquities of Indian heritage and Indian culture. The two acts were of the time period 1904. The first act was in 1904, and the other act that we are going to discuss in detail is the act that was passed in 1958. As we can see, the one act was pre-independence. It was by the efforts of Sir John Marshall that act of 1904 was passed. We need to remember that Sir John Marshall was the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India from 1902, and he was very concerned with the conservation and preservation of historical monuments of India, and we have already talked about the conservation manual that he drafted and his efforts at preserving and conserving the archaeological remains of Indian heritage was also reflected in his efforts which he made to get this particular act of 1904 passed. So this is the 1904 act, and the other act that we are going to discuss is of the time period 1958. In between these two acts there is another act of 1951. That act was simply the Ancient and Historical Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Declaration of National Importance Act 1951. So in between 1904 Act and 1958 Act, we have this 1951 Act, under which nothing much changed. The only clause that was added in this particular 1951 Act was that certain historical monuments and archaeological sites can be declared the sites of national importance because of the value that they hold in the context of national heritage and the heritage that they are for the Indian nation as such. So that was in 1951. That seems logical because we got independence in 1947, and soon after that this particular act was passed, and under which obviously we've already talked about the certain archaeological sites and historical monuments could be declared and were declared. There were certain archaeological sites that were declared of being of national importance. So that was the another important act that was passed, but there were no major other changes that were made. The only acts that are of relevance for us are 1904 Act and 1958 Act. 1958 Act was amended in 2010, but some of the things were changed, but the major clauses and the major recommendations of the act remain the same. Now, why are these two acts important? These two acts are important because they give us an outline of what to do regarding an archaeological site or historical monument. They give us definitions as in what would you call an archaeological site, what would be an archaeological monument, what would be a monument as such. They also give us definitions of what would be antiquity, what would be an officer in charge. So they give definitions to us of these various terms, and in addition to that they give us recommendations on what can and cannot be done regarding a particular archaeological site or a particular historical monument. They also give us information about penalties that can be levied upon people who do not follow the recommendations and the regulations of that particular act. So this is what these acts tell us. And the major difference between the 1904 Act and 1958 Act are two things. One, that in 1904 Act, the person in charge, the relevant authority to which everything is to be reported, in 1904 Act, that was the district collector. right? The district collectors were still in existence in 1904, and those district collectors had a lot of power, and those were the concerned authority in 1904 Act. In 1958 Act, the concerned authority was the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India. Right, so this is one of the changes that are there between 1904 Act and 1958 Act. The another major difference that is there between these two acts is that in 1904 Act, the religious sites were not included in the protected monuments. We'll come to the definitions of protected monument and what a government, the government of India can and cannot do regarding a site of relevance, of having archaeological relevance. We'll come to that in a bit. But in those protected monuments, a religious site could not be included in 1904 Act, which was changed in 1958. And this is a major thing that we need to understand, because if there's a religious site, then the government cannot, under the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act, take that into possession if any harm is being done to the structure or to the architecture of the historical site. And there were many owners of old structures who would declare it to be of religious value, who would declare it to be a, say, a mosque, say a temple, and then the Act of 1904 would be not able to do anything in that regard if they are making certain changes and they're changing the historically important elements in the particular structure. If that structure is of religious nature, then the Act is not empowered to take possession of that structure, even if the owners are harming that particular structure. So this was something that was problematic in 1904 Act, that was eventually amended or corrected in the 1958 Act. These are the things that we need to remember. Now we'll one by one go through what are the basic regulations of the Act of 1904, and then we'll come to 1958. We'll briefly deal with both these acts that are of concern to us. The Ancient Monuments Preservation Act 1904, the first things that it identifies or tells us is the definitions of various things. Now, according to it, what is an ancient monument? We need to understand what is an ancient monument, which the Act clearly states. An ancient monument means any structure, erection, monument, any tumulus, place of interment, cave, rock sculpture, inscription, monolith, which is of historical, archaeological or artistic interest of the government or of the nation, right? So this is a basic definition. So they have they have marked, or they have given a list of things that can come under ancient monument. So it can be a cave, because a cave would not and cannot be called a structure as such. So they have made sure that most of the things that are of historical value for Indian history would fit in the definition. Monoliths are there, places of interment are there, caves are there, rock sculptures are there. Anything that is of value, anything that can have historical and archaeological value for the Indian historical context. And what all does it include? There are certain things, these are the basic highlights of what an ancient monument is. Now, what all does it include? It includes, an ancient monument includes the site of the monument. So this is very basic, the site of the monument itself. It also includes portion of land adjoining the site of the ancient monument, and it also includes the means of access to the monument. So these are the three things that an ancient monument includes: the actual site, the area around it, and the means to access that area and that particular site. Further ahead, it gives a definition of antiquities. Antiquities, according to the Act, includes any movable object which is of historical or archaeological association for the government of India. Further ahead, it gives definition of commissioner. which includes any officer authorized by the government to perform duties commissioned under this act. So ahead in the act, there are certain duties that are given to certain officers, and any commissioner is any officer which has been given the duty by the central government. So this is more or less it. There again there's the definition of maintain and maintenance of a particular site, which would include fencing, covering, repairing, resorting and cleaning of a particular monument. So these are certain things that are there, and in the conservation manual of Sir John Marshall, we've already discussed what should and should not be done when a particular historical or archaeological site is being conserved. So we already knew about that, and this is also given as a definition in here. Further ahead, land is also defined, and owner is also defined. Owner, who is an owner of a particular archaeological or historical site? Owner includes a joint owner. So when we discussed about the Marshall's conservation manual, we should remember that we talked about the classification of historical monuments, and we know that the classification was done on the basis of ownership. The first category of classification was done on the basis of the condition of the monument, and the second level of classification was done on the basis of ownership of a particular monument. And in that classification, we got to know that there are three kinds of owners that can be there of a particular archaeological historical monument. One, the government itself. Second, a private owner. Third, an archaeological site owned combinedly or jointly by a private owner and a government and the government of India. So these are the three kinds of ownership that is there, and in this regard, when further ahead in the act an owner would be discussed, that term, it is defined here, that term can mean a private owner, the second type of category, and an owner who owns a particular archaeological site or historical monument jointly with the government of India. So this is the definition that it provides us of various things that are of relevance for the act. Now, what are the recommendations? We'll go through very basic major ones that are relevant for us when we study archaeology. We need to understand that the government of India is entitled to declare by a notification in the official gazette any ancient site to be a protected monument under this act. So it is in the power of the central government to declare any particular site a protected site. One first recommendation. And apart from that, what are there? The acquisition rights, that means the right to acquire or own the particular site, or having a guardian of a particular site is also vested in the central government. And the owner of any protected monument, suppose there's a private owner, we've already defined what the term owner means. So if there's an owner privately existing or jointly with the government, the owner can be can write to the commissioner, and the commissioner, we've already understood what a commissioner is. It's an official. It's any official which has been appointed by the government. So we know these terms, and these terms will be used time and again in the recommendations that we are going to deal with. So we know who the owner is, we know what a commissioner is, and the recommendations say that any owner of any protected monument can write to the commissioner, and they would if he wants that particular site to be protected or to be under the guardianship of the central government or the government of India. Further ahead, the agreement that the commissioner and the owner of the particular monument can also enter into an agreement. That agreement can be initiated on behalf of the government, or as we've already seen, on behalf of the owner himself. So that agreement can come into existence, and that agreement would include maintenance, the rules and like the guidelines for the maintenance of the monument, and it would restrict owners' right to destroy, remove, change, alter, deface the monument, because we have already understood from Marshall's conservation manual that the value of the historical and the archaeological site vests or rests in its antiquity and in its not changed structure, not changed walls and technology that can be seen there. So the agreement restricts owners' rights to change a particular structure or destroy a particular part of that structure, and it would also deal with how and how much and if any access would be provided to the general public to that particular structure about which there is an agreement between the government and between a private owner. And also the recommendation talks about and the agreement that the private owner and the government enter into, that would also deal with the expenses, who would pay for the expenses and that would be incurred for the maintenance of a particular monument. So these are the things that are there regarding a private owner, regarding the monument, regarding any historical archaeological monument which is to come under the protection of this act and which has a private owner, and the government and the private owner come together in an agreement. So this can be done, and this is something that is of relevance to us. When this agreement has been entered into, the collector, who is the authority we already know, when concerned about 1904 Act, the collector can terminate the agreement by giving a 6 months notice, and this can also be done on behalf of the owner. So the owner can also give a 6 months notice to the collector and terminate the agreement that they have already entered into regarding a particular monument, particular historical site. This is something of relevance. And what else do we need to know? We need to know that if the owner of a particular site is not cooperating or is not getting convinced regarding getting into an agreement, then the government has this duty of either purchasing that particular monument, and if a government apprehends or thinks that a particular monument is in danger of being destroyed or injured or allowed to fall into decay because of its private ownership's ignorance, then the government may direct, the central government can direct the provincial government to acquire that particular monument and that particular historical site under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act that was already in existence from 1894. So this particular act can be done if the owner of that particular site is not cooperating and that particular site is feared to be destroyed, and there is a fear that a historical value can be lost because of that ignorance, and then the government has the authority that the government would direct the provincial government, the local government, to acquire that particular site. Now here comes the very important part. This power, the power that the government has given to the local authority to acquire a site, the power of this compulsory purchase or this compulsory taking or acquisition of a particular site will not be exercised in case of the monument itself or any part of it. So the monument, and if any part of the monument is a religious structure or there is any religious observance that is going on in the structure or in a part of the structure, then the government cannot do that. The government cannot use that acquisition power to gain access and to gain authority over that archaeological site. So this is something that changed in 1958 Act. The religious sites could also be acquired if there was a fear that the owners of that religious site could be harming the site of its archaeological and historical value. So this is something of very important clause that was there in 1904 Act. Further ahead, there are certain other recommendations, like the central government would control mining in and around the area, it would control excavation in and around the area, it would control any such activity around that particular site which could harm the structure. So these things are also there. Further ahead, regarding the maintenance of the protected monument, they would be maintained in proper state, they would be preserved and conserved. That was also recommended. That was also one of the regulations of the act. And another very major regulation, taking a continuation from the earlier recommendation, where we talked about the land acquisition would not be applicable, or the land acquisition clause of this particular act would not be applicable if that particular structure, monument, or any part of that structure is a religious site. So that is not applicable in case of religious site. And this particular clause is again a continuation from that, when the government should protect a place of worship from misuse, pollution, or desecration. So if there is a place of worship or shrine maintained by the government under this act, it should not be used for any other thing, and it would be continued to be used. See, now there's a thing that we need to understand. That part of the clause where we talked about the acquisition which was not possible, that was for the structures which were already under the possession of a private owner. So if there is, for example, a mosque which is in the private possession of a person or of a agency, then the government cannot interfere in the functioning of the particular structure, and they would not be able to defend that particular structure from being destroyed, from being defaced, from being changed over a period of time. So this is, in that clause, the owner was a private owner. Now this particular clause is about the structures which are owned by the government itself. So the structures which are there under the protection of the government, under government ownership. There is no private owner when this particular clause is being talked about. We need to understand the difference. I hope this was clear. So now, according to this particular clause, the government would ensure that there would be a protection of places of worship, and there would be no misuse or pollution or desecration of a religious site which is under the possession of the government, which is owned by the government, and it would be maintained by the government under this act. So if there is a religious site which is of historical value, that would be maintained under this act by the government, and it shall not be used for any purpose inconsistent with its character. For example, if there's a temple, and if there goes on at certain times worship and rituals and practices go on, that would be allowed, and there would be no disturbance in that original customs and traditions that happen at that place. That would not be altered or disturbed by the government, even if that particular structure is under the government's ownership and protected under this 1904 Protection Act. If any monument under the purchase or guardianship of the commissioner, who is the authority, commissioner who is the officer here, is there, then such a monument or any part thereof which is being used for religious worship or observance by any community would not be, would make sure that particular part of that religious structure where religious observances are carried out, that would be allowed, that would be carried on, that would be not harmed, and the people who are carrying out those religious practices would be allowed to do so. So any living religious structure would be allowed to continue with the original intention with which it was created, if there's a living structure. The collector, who is the supreme authority, is again recommended to make provisions for the protection of such monument. Further ahead, what else the act says, these are the most important sections of the act. Now let's talk about the penalties that are there. If somebody does not follow the recommendations of the act, what would be the penalties in the case certain recommendations are not followed properly? The government is entitled under this act to punish people who destroy any person other than the owner. So the owner, when the owner is the issue, then the government has certain different clauses that can acquire that particular piece of land, and there's certain other issues. But any other person who destroys, removes, injures, alters, defaces a protected monument, and also any owner who destroys, removes, injures, alters, defaces a particular monument which is supposed to be protected under this act can be punished by fine, which may extend to 5,000 rupees in that time, 5,000 rupees, 1904, and which can also be punished by imprisonment, which can range from 3 months. Extended, which can be up to 3 months, or they can be both the fine and the imprisonment. So if an owner is harming the structure, or if any private person, anybody is harming a protected monument under this act, then these are the penalties that would be levied upon that particular offender. And also, if the owner is harming that particular structure, then the government is entitled to take over that structure under the Land Acquisition Act of 1894. Further ahead, there are certain recommendations or penalties which are listed here regarding the control of traffic of antiquities. So antiquities, which are the movable objects, can be moved from India to some other places, to some other countries, and can be sold there for a higher value. So that is also that also needs to be stopped, and there are certain penalties regarding that too. And further ahead, there are also the antiquities regarding sculptures and carvings and other objects which are of historical value. There are certain punishments that are recommended for those acts in which an antiquity or a sculpture or a particular object is moved from one place to another. So without the knowledge of the government, without the approval of the government. So this is something that is of interest to us. These are certain laws that are there, certain recommendations of an act that are there. The government is also entitled to declare any area protected, that we have already talked about, and these are the penalties that are there. If you are harming a particular structure, if you are moving an object from one place to another, then you can be charged, or you can be punished by 5,000 rupees fine and imprisonment ranging up to 3 months, and the antiquity has to be returned to its original place if you're caught moving antiquity. So this is about 1904 Act, more or less what we need to know about it. Apart from that, we have already talked about the 1951 Act, in which there was nothing much, but there was this declaration that certain monuments can be declared of national importance. Since there was a nation in 1951, United India, that was there in 1951, so we know that this was in relevance to that, how certain monuments which have archaeological and historical value in a national context, they could be declared or sites and archaeological remains of national importance. And the 1958 Act, we'll come to that. We'll just briefly deal with it because most of the recommendations of 1958 Act are similar to the recommendations of 1904 Act. So the clauses that we have already discussed regarding possession, regarding ownership, regarding agreement that needs to be there between a private owner and the government, most of the clauses or most of the recommendations and regulations of the 1958 Act are similar to 1904 Act. We've already talked about the differences that are there. The differences majorly are there regarding the authority concerned. In 1904 Act, it was the district collector, and in 1958 Act, it it was the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India. Certain other things were also there, minor differences. The definitions that we have already talked about were more detailed. For example, the ancient monument was now described as any structure. Again, there's a repetition, but there's also certain details that are added. Any structure, monument, tumulus, place of interment, cave, rock, sculpture, inscription, monolith, which is of historical, archaeological, or artistic interest and which has been in existence for not less than 100 years and includes, again, remains of the ancient monument, site of an ancient monument, land adjoining the ancient monument, and means of access to the ancient monument. So there are certain bit more details, but more or less the things are the same. For example, the definition of antiquities here, it would include any coin, sculpture, manuscript, epigraph, and other works of art. Right? Any article, object, or thing detached from a building or a cave. So any piece of a building is also an antiquity now because it can be moved from one place to another. Further ahead, any other object or article which is illustrative of science, art, craft, literature, religious customs, and morals or politics of bygone ages. Any object that gives us information about these things can also be considered an antiquity from now on. So we can see that there are further many details that are added to it, but the basic idea remains the same. In archaeological officers, again defined there, we had a commissioner. Here the term is archaeological officer. Archaeological officer means an officer of the Department of Archaeology of the Government of India. So these are the things that are there, some things that have been added, and the basic change or the basic difference was the now in 1958 Act, the clause where the historical monuments, the clause where the religious monuments were protected from being acquired by the government. So the religious monuments were had this additional feature that they would not be disturbed and they would not be acquired under the Land Acquisition Act if certain damages are being done to that historical site or historical structure because of by the owner, and it needs to be acquired by the government because of its historical value. But if it is a religious structure, or if in any part of that structure certain religious observances are being made, then that would be exempted from the act. That particular exemption to religious monuments was removed in 1958 Act. There was no clause and there was no regulation where religious monuments or religious observances and religious any structure where religious observances are being made was exempted. So there was nothing like that in 1958 Act. This is one we need to understand. Further ahead, the penalties, there are certain more details about them, but they are more or less the same according to the 1958 Act. Penalties are there, and anyone who destroys, removes, alters, defaces, misuses a protected monument protected under this act, would be again punished by imprisonment, which can extend to 3 months, and with a fine which can extend with up to 5,000 rupees, or with both. So this is the punishment that is given to the offender if they are trying to destroy any particular archaeological a site or historical site. And also this is the punishment for people who are trying to remove any sculpture, carving, any other objects. So anything that's an antiquity, if that is being harmed, that is also something that would be punished with these punishments: 3 months jail or 5,000 rupees penalty. So these are the things that we need to understand regarding the laws of preservation and conservation. We need to know that the 1904 Act, which was formulated under the efforts and under the supervision of Sir John Marshall, was something that was a very it covered a lot of area, it covered most of the things, and certain more details were added to that particular act in 1958. And these are the laws, that govern the protection of the historical and archaeological sites as we know them today. And these are the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act, and this is something that holds value for an archaeologist and anybody who is an archaeology enthusiast, because we need to know what are the laws, what are the acts which defend our archaeological sites, no matter what the condition there is today. In theory and in the in theory, we know that the government is entitled and is responsible for the protection of the sites and of archaeological and historical value. The government is responsible to prevent any any changes that are to be made in that particular archaeological or historical site by anybody who is not authorized. So if anybody if you see anybody writing something on a historical archaeological monument, from now on you now know what are the laws and what are the punishments that person can suffer or face, because the defacement of an archaeological site is also included in that punishment. So now we know this, and this is something of very much value to archaeological enthusiasts and people who are concerned about national heritage of India. And thank you.